You're gonna need a bigger boat. Why so serious? I am Iron Man. This is a tasty burger.
Welcome to the In Session Film Podcast.
Welcome to this podcast review for August 18th, 2025, and I'm Jaden Duran.
And I'm Brennan Cassidy.
Hey, thanks for joining us, everybody, for this conversation. Brendan, I don't know about you, but I was most definitely the highest when I was at my lowest. There's no doubt about that.
I was going to ask, are you feeling pretty high or pretty low right now?
I'm feeling pretty high right now, but I'm not high in the conventional sense or how some may think. I'm mostly high on coffee and caffeine. That's my kick. That's my drug of choice.
A different type of drug. A drug nonetheless.
Yeah, it's a different type of drug these days, but it still gives me that kick that I love. So
you know
whether
what else
I'm at
gives
my
me
highest or my lowest, that's my drug of choice these days.
Yeah, you know what else gives me that kick? Little spike. Little
spike. I like to spike my coffee from time to time. Yeah. Who doesn't?
Yeah. Can't say we're gonna Lee that coffee. It's best to say we're gonna spike that
we're
coffee.
Gonna spike it. Now I'm very excited to talk about Spike Lee's latest joint, highest to lowest, starring the great Denzel Washington. I believe this is their fifth collaboration. Is that math correct? Or is this the sixth?
I'm trying to think. So let's. I don't have the list in front of me, so I'm trying to do this off the cuff. We have Mo Better Blues. We have Malcolm X, Inside Man, He Got Game. This. Am I forgetting one?
I think that's it.
So then that would be the fifth.
That's it.
Okay.
Yeah. So I believe this is the fifth collaboration with the two. This is, of course, a modern day adaptation of Akira Kurosawa's High and Low, a film that Brendan and I discussed some years back when we did an Akira Kurosawa movie series, which was a lot of fun.
That was like a decade ago. That was probably
a while ago. It was a while ago. I want to say it probably was around 2015, 16.
I think it was.
Yeah,
I think it was.
It was quite a while ago.
I think I remember being, I guess pun intended, a little lower on that film than some of the others in that series, which I have given that film a few watches since we did that series and know that is one of Kurosawa's best movies. So I will openly admit that now. If I was lower on it at the time, I think it more had to do with, I guess, the company of films that it was paired with when we did that series. Because it's such a jarring tonal shift after you watch something like Akiru and then Seven Samurai and then The Hidden Fortress and then something like that.
Yeah. Well, maybe appropriate then, because I was quite high on that film at the time. So we had the low and the high coming in with that conversation, I guess.
We must have addressed the elephant in the pun in the room with that one.
Perhaps that is the case. But yeah, I think that film is masterful. Absolutely incredible.
Really good.
Movie.
Yeah.
I wish that I got a chance to see the film in preparation for this, but I did go back and at least read my Letterboxd review and got, fresh on High and Low. And I felt pretty good about where I stand with that movie, even if I didn't get a chance to revisit the film in its entirety.
Well, it's a long movie, and we have a 1999 retrospective that we have to prep for as well.
Absolutely. But I do love Kurosawa's High and Low. I think it is really quite great. One of his better movies for sure. With Spike Lee, it's interesting because he's done adaptations before to mixed results. Mostly positive, but not all the time. Certainly not all the time.
I know there are some people in our circle that might defend Old Boy a little bit more than we would. But yeah, I wouldn't say those are necessarily his best efforts, to say the least.
No, and the thing is, I should be more specific with my phrasing there, because Spike, in terms of adaptation, when it comes to novelization, writing,
Yeah.
adapting source material, that he's really great at, obviously.
I agree.
When he's remaking movies, okay.
That's why I
take a
called
pause.
out Old Boy, so that we can at least, make the comparison to that type of
Yeah.
adaptation process that we're alluding to.
Yeah, and I think that was perhaps everyone's reservation when it was announced that he was doing a remake of Akira Kurosawa's High and Low.
Yeah.
Okay. Look, we love Spike, but film remakes hasn't been his strength to this point.
This was an
Even if
interesting
the-
choice, though. Because he's choosing to reinterpret, adapt, remake, if you will, a movie that is kind of regarded as a classic. Not even kind
Yeah.
of. It is absolutely regarded as a
Big
classic.
time.
That's a very bold move and a very daring
Very.
swing. So,
Absolutely.
like, I think just given that, it made me sort of want to disregard that track record of his and actually feel more curious about what he would do with something that is already so heavily beloved among film fans. So I was really curious about that.
It also comes at an interesting time as well, and perhaps we can talk about this further when we actually get to the movie because it is applicable to what we're talking about here. But Old Boy comes at a time in his career where, let's just say, he wasn't feeling all that inspired. The last few years, quite different. Black Klansman.
Yeah,
I would even go all the way back to Chirac.
I was gonna say, I feel like Chirac was the modern day rebirth of Spike Lee.
Yeah, I agree. I think that film is incredibly underrated. Nobody really talks about Chirac, but I think it's really, really good. Certainly one of his better modern films. I would take it over Black Klansman even. And I know a lot of people love that. In fact, I might prefer Chirac over Black Klansman and To Five Bloods. And I'm a big fan of both of those movies.
I think I'm with you. There's a boldness to Chirac that I don't think I'll forget anytime soon.
Yeah, I know.
And not to say that those other films that came afterwards don't have that same boldness. There is something very provocative about all of these films, but Chirac is one of his most interesting movies. And I think I'm always going to hold that as one of his best movies in general.
I agree. It's him at his most ambitious, his most Spike Lee. It is incredible how he takes his ethos and heightens it to 11. And it's phenomenal. I think that is a really great movie. So since Chirac all the way till now, I do think we find Spike in a much more inspired space than when Old Boy came out. And I think that is indicative of what he's wrestling with in Highest to Lowest, which we'll, of course, talk about. So
Yep.
I think that dichotomy is actually quite interesting when we're talking about remakes and films and adaptations here with Spike.
Yeah. There are a lot of filmmakers working today, legacy filmmakers specifically, who are making films that feel like they're kind of addressing their own career in some ways.
Oh boy, that's a big part of my opening thoughts.
Yeah. So I guess that's a nice way to transition into the movie, but I'm noticing that with a lot of filmmakers who are very much, historical and legacy filmmakers of the 1960s and 70s, maybe even the 80s, and their more contemporary films are very much these directors looking at themselves in the mirror. And I think this is what's making Spike Lee so interesting nowadays. I think he's doing something similar, as we'll talk about for sure.
Yeah, I'm just going to leave it at that for now as we transition. But I will say, I think Spike was inspired by more than Akira Kurosawa when it comes to this film, which we'll talk about.
Yeah.
So with that said, let's jump into it. Highest to Lowest is directed by, you guessed it, the great Spike Lee. And it stars Denzel Washington, Jeffrey Wright, A$AP Rocky, everyone's favorite young felon, Dean Winters, boy, do I have thoughts on that, and others that come and go throughout the film. If you're not familiar with highest to lowest, when a Titan music mogul is targeted with a ransom plot, he is jammed up in a life or death moral dilemma. Okay, let's go ahead and jump into this. Brendan, what did you think about highest to lowest?
I dug the living shit out of this thing. um, I don't think it's maybe his best film since Chirac of this modern era, but it might be the one that I'm most interested to rewatch, if that makes sense,
Sure.
because it is a very entertaining movie. I know we alluded to this already, JD. We're going to talk about how this movie is Spike Lee's attempt at looking at himself in the mirror, looking at his own filmmaking legacy and what that means for the modern day and age. I'll hold off on that because I know you have a lot of thoughts on that. I'm sure I can springboard off of that as well. But one of the things I love so much about this movie is just purely functioning as a movie going experience. I was enveloped by this thing from the opening credits and the opening music alone. My
Mm,
first thought was this feels like it came from the early 2000s. It just has a
mm,
very like even the font style of the opening credits reminded me of something that could have starred like Martin Lawrence or something like that. Like it kind of had this early 2000s crime New York comedic vibe to it that just felt so nostalgic. And I think
mm.
given that this movie is essentially about Spike Lee looking at his own career in an almost nostalgic way, I do think that is very deliberate. It's almost unfortunate, not even almost. It's very unfortunate that this is a movie that's only playing in theaters for a short window of time before it's going to be available on Apple TV Plus,
Yeah.
as this is an Apple TV Plus co-production rather with A24, if I'm not mistaken. And this is a movie that's begging to be seen on the big screen. It just
Yeah.
feels so big and old-fashioned in a way that made me miss how movies used to be made. And we're getting a lot more of those nowadays that don't require lore or mythology or some type of franchise to lead up to it. I love that we're getting more movies like this that are singular and still big, but still operate with mid budgets. And this is another great example of that. I think it's a very entertaining, very provocative movie. And given that it's also a Spike Lee joint, that makes it all the more interesting given what he is trying to dissect here. The fact that it is a remake of an old classic movie for reasons we'll talk about, is kind of a symbolic gesture. I think it absolutely is, and I think that makes it such a fascinating movie, but also a very entertaining one.
Yep, I am with you. I really liked this a lot. It is one of Spike Lee's most fascinating films. And I'll just start here since you brought it up moments ago. But yeah, it did remind me a lot of Martin Scorsese in recent years or Quentin Tarantino with Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, in the sense that this is Spike Lee wrestling with his legacy and how it intersects with the changing cultural and artistic landscape.
Mhm,
But as you also noted in your opening thoughts, it is extremely entertaining. This is a really
mhm.
funny movie. The humor here is excellent. It might be his funniest film to date. There is an insurance joke at some point in this film that had me on the floor. I think it's as good as anything I've seen this year. There's an
Also, yeah,
A24 gag, sight gag,
yeah,
which
yeah.
is
Well,
so silly and dumb.
the insurance joke, I don't want to give it away, but also considering
Oh,
some of the casting
it's very
choices of this
meta.
movie, it's
Yeah, it's so good. It's so good. I really liked it a lot. And as you could probably guess, this is also a love letter to New York. The
yeah.
reverence he denotes here is at once playful and earnest. We know that Spike loves New York and his love is deeply felt here, but I do love how playful it is at
Mhm.
times as well, most notably in that subway sequence. Again, how that rubs up with the film's humor is quite great.
So, yeah,
There
Spike Lee must not like
is
Boston very much.
yeah, shocking. I love that here. Yeah, there's a lot to love about this film, but maybe ironically, I think where it falters most is with it as an adaptation. A lot of
Okay.
people have been criticizing the first half of this film, especially. And while I think some of that is a little overblown, that is where this film is at its most flawed. Once it transitions to the kidnapping and thus mirroring high and low, this film does stumble over itself. The editing at times in that first half is just weird. It's flat out weird at times. The performances aren't at their best either. It gets somewhat melodramatic. The script is trying to navigate the adaptation with what Spike really wants to do, and I do think it struggles a little bit. But that said, even inside of that, some scenes in a vacuum are very compelling as it relates to David's moral dilemma and how that rubs up against his family and with what we see with Paul, which is why I don't think it's all that bad. But once the film gets away from the adaptation, this film thrives. And much of the back half is very, very different from the Kurosawa film. It is Spike doing his own thing. And because it's Spike getting to play in his own sandbox, the guardrails are off and he's able to channel his filmmaking ethos to wrestle with legacy and the purity of art. I've seen some critics call this Spike's flawed masterpiece, and I kind of agree with that. I like that phrasing for this film. It is not perfect by any means, but I love it for the same reasons that I love Once Upon a Time in Hollywood and The Irishman and other great films in recent years where we've seen directors grappling with what their art means to them in a quickly evolving world, a world that they helped shape. Yeah. That element of this film is formidable and it's fantastic. I just think the irony that it thrives in this great way once Spike moves away from adaptation, and we talked about that a moment ago. So there is some great irony to this film in that regard, but
sure.
I love what Spike is doing. I love the energy, love the vibrancy. Cannot say enough good things about Denzel Washington and Jeffrey Wright. I think they're both incredible.
They're magnetic. They're so magnetic here.
So magnetic. I'm sure we'll talk about them more as this conversation goes. But yeah, I enjoyed the hell out of this movie as well.
Yeah, and making comparisons to the likes of The Irishman from Martin Scorsese, or Once Upon a Time in Hollywood from Quentin Tarantino, or The Fabelmans from Steven Spielberg.
The Fabelmans, another great example. Yeah.
But I think what makes these movies comparable, it's not just that these are filmmakers looking at their own legacies and dissecting it and almost critiquing it, but these are movies that also try to do some creative things by challenging the form of what these filmmakers kind of created in the first place. I think that's why I was kind of okay with the wonky editing choices of the first third of Highest to Lowest, because it kind of seems as though it's Spike trying to imbue this type of movie with some new innovative things that sort of make thematic sense for what this type of movie is. Almost as if he's trying to go back to the well of what kind of movie he has made before and try to imbue it with some very wonky editing choices to give it some flair. And they don't always work. But I think much like some of these other movies, some of those imperfections are what make the movies kind of interesting. And I think that's sort of what's happening here, even if it is maybe a little jarring when you get to the actual meat of the story and then it becomes an actual Spike Lee version of that Kurosawa story. There definitely is a bit of a setup and a kind of an escalator ride to get to that point. But he is doing some really intriguing things to challenge the form a little bit. That's both familiar, but also not. I found that I found that deliberate in a way that I was sort of fascinated by, which I love. I love when movies can do that.
That is really fascinating, and I haven't connected the dots that specifically until you laid it out there, because what's so fascinating about the David character in this film, the Denzel Washington character, is that it is obviously a cipher for Spike Lee himself, right? Sure. David resides in this high tower, but he's clearly past his prime, and the changing landscape is leaving him in this state of purgatory to the point where we find out early on in the film that he had sold his shares of his company some years ago and is now trying to buy them back because he's had some sort of epiphany that this is his life's work, and he doesn't want to see it exploited by another company,
or AI.
Well, I'll get to that in a second, but that is the one thing that does humanize David, I think we can all relate to the idea of our work and legacy having some sort of meaning.
Sure.
And again, going back to the humor of the film, I love how brazen Spike is with some of the dialogue here, where we hear David, to your point, complaining about AI and social media follower accounts and how success is defined by money, wink, wink, the box office, which we can all hear coming from Spike directly. There's even a scene where David's wife, Pam, lovingly scolds him for losing sight about the purity of the art and that maybe he lost touch with why he loved music in the first place. And when you look at Spike's career from She Hate Me to Black Klansman, Inside Man Aside, and we somewhat alluded to this a moment ago, you can kind of see how that might have been the case for Spike. It's not exactly subtle, but when has Spike ever been subtle? But the idea of an aging artist looking to remain vital and relevant in today's cinematic landscape or musical landscape, as we see in this film, is deeply resonant. I think that's why the back half of the film is so effective, because Spike removes all of those constraints to, in his own way, fully explore that with David as he gets back to his roots, so to speak. Even literally, much of what takes place in the back half of the film does go to David's old neighborhood, which is even more fascinating, to your point a second ago, when you consider the filmmaking of this film. That wonky editing and uneven filmmaking, maybe that was intentional. Maybe that was purposeful.
I think it was.
Because David is a lost soul, someone that is trying to find himself. And so Spike is using framing and composition and editing that isn't necessarily his style, because it is reflective of the character and how he's lost touch with his own identity. And once he finds and regains that identity, the back half of the film, that's where we see Spike become Spike again.
That's when there's a smoothness to it. Yeah, there's a familiarity to it in that regard.
So that filmmaking transition, I never really thought about it, but that makes sense. That might have been very intentional on Spike's
I like the
part.
way you took that further, because my initial argument was really just more for the aesthetics of it, that this was maybe a way for Spike Lee to prove this point that we're in an artistic day and age now where the experimentation of filmmaking that was so prevalent in the 70s and 80s is just not as existent anymore. And that kind of kinetic editing style of the first act was his way of trying to showcase, hey, filmmakers can be creative. They can do weird things. Maybe they don't always work, but it's part of that vision. And we need to see those visions come through. But you articulating it further, that this is perhaps meant to reflect the almost paranoid headspace of David himself, I think adds even more credence to this potential argument. So in a way, it's already making me like the movie more. Like, again, it goes back to that point that sometimes when these movies, and how ambitious that they are, when their flaws are simultaneously the most intriguing elements of these movies, I like that. I really like that, because you have to sit back and wonder, are those flaws deliberate? Like, are they there because they are trying to suggest something? And in this case, I think it absolutely is.
It makes sense. Honestly, it really does make sense with what we see with David in the first half of this film, where he commits to going to his son's basketball practice and then bails on him. I don't want to say lies, but he keeps certain things from his wife in terms of their financials.
Yeah.
And he's not fully truthful when he's talking to one of his business cohorts. I'm not sure how to label him. I guess he's on the board with David. He's sort of kind of manipulating him there a little bit. And then he has a conversation with him at about the midway point of this film, which is very gray morally, we shall say. So there's a lot to David where he is this murky, prickly guy. And not to mention some of the conversations he has with Paul about the $17 million. Is he going to pay that? And that, again, is where it mirrors High and Low. If you've seen that film, you do expect that to some degree. But inside of that murkiness, Spike's direction is kind of all over the place in a way that as we've seen in a lot of reviews, excuse me, it's been reflective of how people have found this film messy, and I think
Hmm.
they're right on that. I
Yeah.
do think it's messy, but as we're somewhat coming to a conclusion here, I think we've discovered that this is
Some
Spike maybe
yeah.
playing chess when a lot of us are playing checkers,
Well,
kind of a thing.
sometimes messiness can be a good thing, right?
Yeah.
If it is deliberate, and sometimes it's also a bad thing. And we've criticized movies that we found to be messy if they're messy
Mhm.
for the wrong reasons. But I think this is messy for,
Yeah.
I don't want to say the right reasons, but it's messy for reasons that gets me thinking.
Yeah.
All the stuff that mirrors Akira Kurosawa's film is all here. To your point, the whole morality of this situation of David King wrestling with the idea that this is actually not my kid that's been kidnapped, but he has been kidnapped because of my status and because of what I represent. Am I still morally obligated to participate in this and pay this ransom? Those
Yeah.
questions are still here. So you could still experience the movie on that level if you want. But I'm more fascinated at the Spike Lee elements
Yeah.
as to how this represents him as a filmmaker nowadays, what this generally means for the changing landscape of art as it relates to the 70s versus now. There's a huge discussion about that, how AI plays a part into that, and the fact that this is about music is kind of beside the point. If anything, it's really just about art in general, what that means nowadays.
Mhm.
And I found myself more intrigued by that element of it. Like
Yeah.
that stuff I just thought was fascinating.
I do think there is a meta component to it in some ways
Hmm.
because this is a film that is distributed by A24, but also Apple. I believe you
Yeah,
noted this earlier on the conversation. This
yeah,
film
it's a joint.
is getting a very limited release,
Hmm.
and it's going to Apple TV Plus in 2 weeks. So this is a film that is, I don't want to say a victim, but certainly a significant cog in the machine in terms of the modern cinematic landscape. A
Yeah,
lot of films go to Apple TV Plus. You even consider the marketing for this film leading up to its release. So many of us were complaining that Apple was doing zero marketing for this movie. None
yeah.
whatsoever. It's non existent. It was akin to Sing Sing last year. Well, that is a part of the current cinematic landscape, something that this film is addressing head on. So it is interesting that this film is being made and distributed by two companies that are reshaping how the industry looks and how it functions and
Yeah.
operates. And here's Spike going, I don't know how the future is going to look, how the industry is going to operate. There's a lot of dubiousness. And again, in the film, it's talking about music, but if we're
Yeah,
relating it
it's
to
a
film, there's
cipher
a
for
lot of,
movies. Yeah, yeah,
exactly, a lot of dubiousness as far as what the future of art and entertainment could look like. But
hmm
that's why it is important to maintain that artistic integrity and getting back to your roots, so to speak, which
honestly, yeah,
again is what I love about the the idea of, because here's another element of it, when you're talking about the modern cinematic landscape, maybe this is a movie that he could not sell unless he wrote it within the confines of a remake of a classic movie. And that is something that I also believe
hmm
that could be very true about this movie. Maybe there's a version of this that was written outside of this being a remake and no one wanted to touch it.
and then it had to get
But
morphed into being a remake in some way.
exactly. And which adds, and again, that's me inferring. I don't know if that's true or not, but if it is, that certainly adds some fascinating texture to
I
this movie in
yeah,
terms of
yeah.
that dichotomy we mentioned earlier of the film is messy inside of it being a remake, again, being very purposeful, and then it becomes Spike doing his own thing, and that's where the film flies.
I think you're onto something though, because whether or not the movie is that direct or that singular in that meta component you're talking about, I do think the way this movie was made and how it's being distributed is very much baked into this narrative in a very indirect way, that the fact that this is a joint production between A24 and Apple is kind of a symbolic gesture. The fact that this is now a remake of a classic film, like I mentioned earlier, kind of a symbolic gesture, especially given that Apple and A24 have very different roles in the modern landscape of film right now, right? One of them being a bit more pro art, the other one more pro business. So you've got two sides of that already being discussed here. And the fact that this is also a remake of a classic film, a very great and well-made film that's regarded as one of the best directed films ever made of its time, is once again showcasing how the landscape of filmmakers and their visions are not the same anymore. Just the fact that it is a remake of a great film with that kind of status, I think adds to that symbolic gesture. Like everything about how this movie was concocted and stirred, like this entire stir fry of a movie has meaning. It really does.
It's crazy.
And I find that stuff more interesting. I'm liking this movie even more as we talk about it.
Yeah, it's fascinating. I don't know if this terminology is a one-for-one translation, but according to the Hollywood Reporter, Spike Lee received, and this is their phrasing, an original script by Alan Fox prior to the COVID-19 pandemic, and then was involved in rewriting the film after Denzel came on board and was attached to star.
Okay.
That suggests to me exactly what we were just talking about.
I think
it
at the
doesn't
very
go
least
into
it's a
too
clue.
much detail beyond that, but if it was truly an original script that they then had to rewrite, again, putting the high and low parameters around it as a selling point, it does seem like that might be the case.
Gosh, that's so interesting.
That
is so interesting. This is
so fascinating.
very silently becoming one of the best movies of the year. I really think so.
I'm certainly loving it more and more. And we haven't even talked about Paul yet, which might be my favorite supporting character of the year to this point.
Oh, gosh. Jeffrey Wright. What a man. What a man.
He is incredible. Can we talk about how he is one of the best actors working right now in the last decade or so? I mean, he's been
amazing.
great his entire career, but the man is on another level over the last 10 years. Everything he does has been fantastic.
How ironic that talent has always been there, right?
Oh,
but
of course.
we've started to discover it a little bit more, or at least we're starting to see it more and more after another great filmmaker, Wes Anderson, started tapping into his own legacy and used Jeffrey Wright as a cipher for some of those things. So
big time.
How clever and ironic that here Jeffrey Wright is again doing some similar things in another filmmaker's own legacy mirroring experiment. I think that's really intriguing.
I still argue that he should have won an Oscar for The French Dispatch. He should have. He's that good in that movie.
It's a wonderful performance. Fantastic
in Asteroid City. You gotta love him in The Batman, American Fiction. Obviously, he's really great there. The Phoenician Scheme, fun little role. And now here he is in Highest to Lowest, and genuinely, it is one of the best supporting performances of the year for my money. Anyway, I love this duality in the performance where he shows great loyalty to David, and there is a sincerity that Jeffrey Wright brings to that within the character, and it's incredibly affable, but also ingeniously funny in this movie. Like so funny. Like his timing
that
is
insurance
impeccable.
Joke, one of the funniest things we've seen all decade.
So good. It's so good. I love how he doubles down on it as well, which makes it even better. Going back to the casting that you noted a moment ago. It's really, really great. I love how he pushes back against the cops constantly. He's not a pushover despite him being perhaps lowest on the poll in terms of, society norms go. He's just an assistant that works for David, and he mentions several different times he owes his life to David. They've known each other for a long time, and we get a little backstory, not too much, but we get enough that
Yeah.
he made some mistakes in his past. His wife has died, so he's a single father, and he's totally reliant on the graces of David in a lot of ways, which of course adds some dramatic irony given the sense that it's his son that is ultimately kidnapped and not David's son.
Right.
But that dynamic between those two characters, it's fantastic. I mean, he even pushes back against David a little bit when he's
yeah.
begging him for the $17 million, but he does it in this incredibly daunting way that makes your heart break for the character, but he's not overdoing it as well. You really empathize with them. Like it's a really well-rounded character despite the limited screen time. And I don't think I ever stopped smiling when he was on screen. It's just phenomenal.
Well, he's kind of the emotional center point of the movie in some ways.
Yeah.
I mean, I guess, David King, played by Denzel Washington, is front and center, but I feel like there's a lot more of a thematic center point with him, whereas Paul is kind of the emotional piece to counterbalance that. And on top of being very funny, as you mentioned, the character
my
of Paul
gosh,
is quite hilarious here. So, in some ways, I feel like Jeffrey Wright has the harder job because he has to balance two completely different tonal extremes. He is the emotional center point, but he's also kind of the comic relief at the same time.
Yeah.
And that's not to disregard Denzel and his performance. He's terrific in this movie. He's doing a lot of what he has been known to deliver over the years and is in some ways more here as a cipher for Spike Lee himself. So where Denzel excels in his role is a lot of it has to do with Spike Lee's direction. There's more of a synergy there between the two of them.
For sure.
But Jeffrey Wright has got a really difficult task here because those are two tonal extremes that he has to manage.
I agree. Denzel is fantastic. And what I really appreciate about Denzel is that you really do come to feel the prickliness of that character and those moral dilemmas without us ever feeling too far removed.
No, you still have some empathy for him because he's still a good father. He still makes choices, familial choices, where you can tell that there is genuine love in that family, and you can feel that. So those things are still there.
Yeah, he's very charming. He's endearing. He's funny himself. There's some great dialogue. I love that moment he has with his son in the car where he's joking with him about how much screen time that he has. There's some great humor, and that's why I go back to the messiness of this film in the first half that people have, criticized this film over. Again, I think much of it is warranted, but where I do think some of it is a little overblown, especially in hindsight of this conversation and how I think it's now purposeful. But even coming into this conversation, I think there were some great scenes in a vacuum and also some really funny scenes in a vacuum as well. Like I think the humor is consistent all the way through.
Agreed.
And Denzel is certainly a part of that. So I do love that he taps into that moral ambiguity in this great way that eventually crystallizes into something new in the back half of the film. And that works because of Spike's direction and storytelling for sure, but Denzel is certainly a significant cog in that machine as well. But you are right about Jeffrey Wright and that duality. It is challenging because we do see how he has to maintain the beating heart of this movie, especially when David is at his lowest, if you will.
Yeah.
And how he approaches David without feeling ungrateful. I love that he like Jeffrey Wright does such a great job of maintaining this affable gratefulness while understanding what's at stake, and that his son is his life force at that point. And if that's taken away, God knows what would happen to him. That moment of him praying once he finds out that David is going to back him in all of this is a stunning moment that
and some
I
of
think
the
works
editing
because
choices
of his
there.
performance.
Yeah, Yeah, there's some really strange editing choices there too that are kind of frightening as well. We get a perspective shift at one
We
point that
do.
is really quite scary, especially given the image of
Hmm.
that. But again, it kind of goes back into the power of this form of prayer and emotional prayer that Paul is engaging in. It just proves how crucial that this character is in being the
Hmm.
dramatic nucleus of this movie. Really necessary, really great work from Jeffrey Wright.
Oh, it's so good. Yeah, I loved it. Absolutely loved it. And again, I cannot overstate how funny he is in this movie too.
I
It
I
is
I wanna give
so good.
away the freaking insurance joke. I got it. I
I know.
can't do it. I can't do it. I
It's,
can't do it.
every time I think about it, though, I literally laugh out loud. It's so great. It is
But
one of my favorite scenes of the year.
it is the delivery as well. It's not just the
Oh
joke
my
itself,
gosh,
which again,
yes.
credit to Jeffrey Wright for the delivery of that.
It's just so good. Oh yeah, it's the best. Yeah, like though that moment, and I also love when he's pushing back against the cops. Like those moments are just terrific in this
Well,
movie.
and there's a lot of fear in the way that he pushes back because we know that he has a criminal history, right?
Yeah,
And when we know that fact, and we can sense that this is a man that's a bit harder edged, right? You kind of feel like you're waiting for some type of shoe to drop. Like it's building some type of suspense, and Spike Lee seems to be aware of that. It's a really good trick. Yet at the same time, you still get the sense that Paul is this man, as hard edged as he is genuinely looking to be rehabilitated for his actions, right?
yes.
You do get that sense again. This balancing act, this hot wire act that
Mhm.
Jeffrey Wright has to navigate. It's all really well done, and you get all that coming together for sure.
I agree. I agree. I mean, even in those outbursts of anger, and again, that's where the brilliance of the performance lies. The insurance joke is a little bit more overtly comedic, and he
Mhm,
nails the delivery. To your point, it's absolutely perfect. But in some of those outbursts and how he pushes back against the cops, they do come at tense moments where the
mhm,
drama is at its most pulsating in some ways, and
yeah,
yet he's able to deliver that dialogue when the character is again is pushing back against the cops, where
yeah.
it makes sense dramatically what he's saying, but he also delivers it with this punchiness that is very funny simultaneously.
Mhm,
It's just incredible,
yeah,
incredible work in that regard.
yeah. Definitely one of the better performances of the year so far.
What did you think about ASAP Rocky as young felon here?
Oh, I thought he was very effective. I think if anything, I was more uh, enamored by kind of the symbolism of having him or a figure like him in this movie. I think he definitely sells the criminality of what his character is.
Mm,
But I think I was more invested in what that character represents, especially given the modern day and age of art, movies, and music specifically, as this movie is commenting on, that in order to get ahead, it's all about what your social media presence is, how you
yeah,
actually can sell yourself. In a weird way, the final confrontations that occur between ASAP Rocky and Denzel Washington, where they kind of play like this producer artist kind of dynamic against each other. And ASAP Rocky's just not able to meet him at his level because he's cut from a more contemporary cloth. Uh, it kind of reminded me a little bit of Martin Scorsese's The King of Comedy, given how that man, Rupert Pumpkin, has to get ahead in very false ways, in very
yeah.
unethical ways. It kind of reminded me of that in a very high level way. But I think the way that ASAP Rocky taps into that metaphorical idea is very effective, which is not a
Mm,
very easy thing to do, especially for someone that isn't, you know, by profession, an experienced actor. And I
yeah.
think he is able to dive into that and really sell that metaphorical idea. So I think he's effective there.
Yeah, I think what I appreciate about his performance, especially in that scene that takes place in the studio where we're really introduced to him for the first time in a real
Hmm.
way. He
Hmm.
has a few small cameo like appearances early on in the film, but
Yeah.
once he's fully introduced to us and he has that verbal sparring with David. I mean, he goes toe to toe there with Denzel, and I think does a really good job in tapping into those thematic ideas that you're talking about there. And I
Hmm.
think another element to it that I would also add on to what you're saying,
Hmm.
because the film had set up earlier in the film about the changing, you know, musical landscape in terms of streaming and social media follower accounts, and to your point, how all of that is the new currency when it comes to entertainment, why
Yeah,
that matters.
which is a world I know all too well, and I hate it
Yeah.
so much.
Yeah, I'm sure you do. The other thing I find interesting is that, and maybe this is spoilers, but I do need to discuss this because I think it matters to this conversation. So perhaps spoilers for this film. If you've
Okay.
seen the original High and Low, the Kurosawa film, you kind of perhaps have an idea of what I'm about to say anyway.
Hmm.
But given young felon and what he does, and he is the major culprit for the film's dramatic tension. So he does this very highly illegal thing that in a king of comedy type world 50 years ago, you end up in jail for 50 years and that's the end of it.
Yeah.
But in 2025, those things thrust you further into pop stardom
Yeah.
and thrust you further into popularity. I I love what Spike is commenting on there as well. You can do this highly illegal, dangerous thing. You kidnap someone. Who knows? If the kid lives or dies. Spoiler alert again, he doesn't die. He lives.
Yeah.
But he does this highly illegal thing, and the repercussions are okay, yeah, you go to jail for a little bit, but there's not much consequence in terms of his career. He's
Yeah.
got all
In
these
fact,
labels willing to line him up.
yeah. In
He's
fact,
got
it benefits him.
millions of streams, and he is more popular because of his actions. Not It's not a career
It's
ender. And that
Yeah.
is absolutely the world we live in now.
It absolutely is. It's about the publicity of the art and not about the art. And that's
Mhm.
really what this movie is commenting on. And that's why, even though this is about music more directly, it is also speaking to the film industry nowadays, because I think they
Mhm.
are working in parallel as of right now.
Yeah, sure.
Whether it be about AI, whether it be about the unethical business practices, about selling publicity as opposed to selling art, that's definitely a conversation between all aspects of art nowadays and how we consume it. And this is a movie that's really addressing that head on. And that's why I thought
Mhm.
the ending of this movie, the actual ending we get, the final scene, is really quite touching. In a weird way, I'm making another comparison here, even though these movies are nothing alike, but I think in some ways they kind of are now that I think about it. That ending reminded me a lot of Ryan Coogler's Sinners from earlier this year.
Mhm.
Given that these are both movies that are celebrating the soulful roots of this type of music, black music specifically, and not what it has become, but where it stemmed from. And that's
Mhm.
essentially what David King is now looking for at the end. Why that final performance is so crucial is because it is very old fashioned. Much like this movie is an adaptation or a remake of a movie from a different era. That old fashioned mentality is really what this movie is about in some ways. And I love that it has so much reverence for that.
No, I completely agree. And critics smarter than me, more in tune with this film's musicality, have talked about the use of score here, which I do think is great. I do really like the original score here, but there's a lot
Mhm.
of soundtrack music here that is equally fantastic. And a lot of it derives from what you're talking about in terms of the soulfulness of this film and how it
Yeah.
takes advantage of black music to crystallize the themes that Spike Lee is trying to
I
tackle here.
Yeah, I had a lot of fun just watching Denzel walk around his home office and looking at the album covers that he had on the wall. That's going to be a moment when the movie is available on Apple TV and I decide to watch it again. I'm going to pause those scenes to see, oh, that's one of my favorite albums. Oh, yep, there's Nas. I love that album. Oh,
Yeah.
Parliament's Mothership Connection. I love that.
Yeah.
Oh, did I just see Stevie Wonder's Songs in the Key of Life? That's one of the greatest albums of all time. So, like, the music nerd in me really got interested in all that stuff. But
Yeah.
again, like that's what this movie's about. And to your point about the soundtrack and how some of these critics have already highlighted this very eloquently, the soundtrack is very, for lack of a better term, old-fashioned. We get "Ain't No Stopping Us Now" as one of the best needle drops of the year. It's really great. It's surprisingly not as hip hop focused as I would have expected. Yet the movie is not against the movement of hip hop culture. It's still very much celebrating that. It's just celebrating where this music originally stemmed from and what it meant to be influenced by something, as opposed to the commodification of this music. And that's what it's pushing back against.
Yeah, and I think the ASAP Rocky song for this film is also really good in terms of giving.
It's actually not
credence
bad.
to
It
the
actually
character.
gives him some credibility, even though we're
Yeah.
not supposed to appreciate the methods of how he achieves said credibility. Like that hook in that song. I was actually listening to the soundtrack earlier. That's a hook. That's got a
It
good
is.
hip hop up to it.
It's a good hook. It's catchy musically. I think it works really well in giving credence to Young Felon as an artist, someone that people would find themselves attached to, even if he hasn't quote unquote made it in a traditional sense, which is obviously the whole polarity between him and David and that conversation they have there in the studio. I think the song that he has here is important for that.
It's
and
instantaneously
effective.
memorable. Yeah. Pack out the trunk from the front to the back.
Yeah. It's good. I mean,
good. It's good.
Because that could have easily have come off as, I don't know, tacky, but I don't think it does.
Very superficial.
It's genuinely good. Yeah,
it is. Yeah. Because to your point, it could have been very deliberately tacky to the point that it would have made the movie's messaging a bit more obvious than I think it really should have been. But I like that it still does give ASAP Rocky here a little bit of credibility, Young Felon a little bit of credibility here.
Yeah, it's really great. I mean, say what you will about Spike, but I think that is one of his biggest strengths, how he incorporates music. It's such a big part of Chirac, and it is masterful in that film as well. So I was not surprised to see this film and its use of music be extremely effective once again. So
yeah, and to that point too, I know we want to highlight the original score as well from Howard Drossen, I believe his name is. I don't know if I'm pronouncing that right. Not Spike's usual collaborator, not Terrence Blanchard, and the music does have a different vibe. The music kind of never stops. It's kind of one of those things where I can totally see people walking away from this movie saying the musical score was absolutely obnoxious, because it kind of is, but I think it's supposed to be. In a way, it actually does a great job complementing the wonky editing choices of that first third, like we talked about, and I think it actually maybe supports our argument a little bit more. But once we get on the train, man, that score track that plays over the train is absolutely amazing. I love that.
I think that's a great point, because the original score is most prominent in the first half when Spike, again, to what we're arguing anyway, is deliberately operating outside of himself.
Yeah.
And you feel it. It doesn't feel like a traditional
It's
Spike joint.
Yeah.
It is disorienting. So that's where the score, in this classical sense, I guess, and at least it's certainly different from what we usually get with Spike, that's where you hear it most prominently. But once the film shifts to Spike's identity in the back half of the film, that's when it becomes more soundtrack oriented, and it's arresting. It's really great stuff. Do you have any final thoughts here on highest to lowest?
No, I'll just say once again, after this conversation, this is slowly becoming one of my favorite films of the year. I knew I really liked it walking out of the theater, but the more we've talked about it, this is slowly rising for me. This is getting higher and higher, not as low. It's getting higher and higher for me. I'm really curious to give this one a second go, which I definitely will do when it's available on Apple TV. I want to see how well it plays at home as opposed to in a theater, because seeing it in a theater, especially with a proper sound system, it was so enveloping in the best ways. And I absolutely recommend that primarily for a movie like this, especially given how old-fashioned and movie-like that it feels. But yeah, I think this is potentially going to end up as one of my favorites of the year when we get to the end. I really think it's quite good.
I really liked it a lot as well. The other casting note that I want to emphasize once again, I mentioned it earlier, but Dean Winters is in this film.
Yeah.
A lot of people might not know Dean Winters all too well. Oh, let me rephrase. You absolutely know who Dean Winters is, even if you don't know who Dean Winters is. He hasn't done as much prominent film work. He's done more TV work than film work. But everybody in America, at the very least, maybe the whole world, I don't know how far these commercials go, but we all know him as the Allstate Mayhem guy.
Yep.
And he's fantastic in those commercials, which leads to the best joke of maybe the entire year, as we've been talking about. And since we've already given a spoiler alert,
Okay, let's just go ahead and reveal this.
Go ahead.
Oh, well, what's the first thing that he says? Paul pulls out a gun. David said, "What is that?" He goes, "This is my car insurance," or something like that, right?
It's insurance.
It's insurance. Yeah.
Yeah.
And then I think he gives that gun to David, and then later on, Paul pulls out an even bigger.
He says the name of it first before he gives it to David.
Yeah.
So he pulls out the first gun. David says, "What is this?" It's insurance.
Yeah.
I call this Jake from State Farm.
Yeah, Jake from State Farm.
That's so good.
Yeah.
And then he pulls out
an even bigger gun and says, "This
Yeah.
is mayhem."
This is mayhem. It's so dumb but brilliant. I love it.
I love when you can get a wink at the camera moment in a movie like that actually doesn't involve a literal wink at the camera.
I know. It's great. Like, to your point earlier, the way Jeffrey Wright delivers that, he makes it work. It is so good.
It's amazing. It's amazing.
So
this
good.
movie rocks. This movie
It
rocks.
rocks. Also, I'll just note again a dumb little sight gang that I did chuckle at when David goes to visit the wife, girlfriend, fiance of young felon. I forget the character's name, but he goes to the apartment and the apartment number is
A24. I noticed that too.
Yeah. I love that Spike doesn't give a shit about being subtle. Like, doesn't care at all.
Well, which is kind of interesting because, I mean, how many movies get made these days before they even know who's going to be distributing it? What company is going to be distributing it? I mean, in this case, they clearly did, right?
Well, yeah, according to this, A24 is one of the production companies.
Okay, they're one.
So it was always going to be them and Apple.
Right.
They were two of the major. There's a few more as well, but A24 and Apple are the two biggest production companies. So they were funding this from the beginning.
Got it. Okay.
So anyway, I love this film. I'm with you. I think this is one of my favorite movies of the year, and after this conversation, it's only grown on me more. I enjoyed the hell out of this movie. It exceeded all my expectations and more. I loved it.
Yeah, I was wrapped up in it.
Okay, well, with that said, if you agree or disagree with anything we had to say here, you can leave a comment below. If you're watching on YouTube, if you're listening on Apple Podcasts or Spotify, hit us up on social media, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, Blue Sky. You can always email us in sessionfilm@gmail.com. All right, stay tuned. Episode 650 is this week. We are going to be talking about Denzel Washington a little bit further as Brendan and I do a collective ranking of his top 10 performances. So you can be on the lookout for that. And I don't know if we're going to have another review. We had maybe decided on doing the Netflix movie that came out over the weekend. Night Always Comes. Is that the name of it? Something.
I
along
I
those
don't
lines.
remember. It's such a blank title.
Yeah. Well, look, I will say this. I got halfway through it, and I texted Brendan, and I don't know if I could finish.
Which is kind of interesting because isn't the movie getting fairly decent reviews?
I don't know. I don't know.
I think it's at like a 61 on Metacritic, I think, which is not
Yeah.
great, but certainly higher than what you seem to suggest.
Yeah, I mean, maybe it's because I'm such a huge fan of something like Bicycle Thieves, or you know, like not One Less is another one I've seen recently. Like you see these movies that tackle similar ideas and are so much more profound, and the filmmaking is so much more proficient.
Sure.
Night Always Comes is contrivance the movie. There's not much character. It's just awkward entertainment, awkward dialogue. You know, it's more about the plot mechanics of it than it is trying to say or do anything interesting. Which again, I like if it's just if it just wants to function as a piece of entertainment, whatever. But not my thing, not my cup of tea.
Well, it also comes down to this notion that we tend to pick movies that we think are going to make for the better conversations, right? And even if a movie like that isn't bad, sometimes a movie that's just simply not bad makes for the worst material for a podcast. If that's the case,
So
maybe
we'll
you made
see.
the right call.
We'll see. I did watch half of it, so maybe I'll have a change of heart. I'll finish it. Who knows?
You'll
We'll see.
text me in a few days saying I finished this movie. It's actually the best of the year.
Probably not.
No, it's
Probably not. We might get to it though later on in the week. We'll see. We'll see how the week goes. I don't know if we're gonna have a review for Nobody 2. And again, I'm trying to work with our team to see if we can put that together. We'll see. We might have another review. We might not. Just be on the lookout for that. But again, episode 650 for sure is coming out. A new Women in Session, and we also might have a new Chasing the Gold. With
right.
the fall season coming around, it's going to be here very, very soon. And I know Shadon and Erica and everybody is getting prepared for award season, so we might have a new Chasing the Gold coming very, very soon as well.
It's already late August, technically.
I know,
That's
it's crazy.
weird.
Absolutely crazy. With all of that said, thanks for listening, everybody. Thanks for watching. We'll see you next time on the In Session Film Podcast.